to bring in additional federal money. And federal law allows states to use an existing tax system, and it has to be a statewide tax system with a uniform rate, and to use a tax system like that, and then the federal government will match the taxes generated from application of that tax to a long-term care program. So what has happened here is that our legislature picked the sales tax because there is a statewide sales tax, and even though there's different rates in different counties, there's a base sales tax of 6%. And where you have differences, it's because there's a local sales tax added for transportation or for something else. But there's a statewide sales tax of 6%. So we're using the sales tax as a mechanism to capture additional federal money. This is all going to be seamless and transparent to providers, or at least many people are working very hard to make sure that's our goal, is that it's seamless and transparent to providers and to consumers. There'll be one extra check that the IHSS workers will get a year, and it will show that from their annual wages that there's a sales tax assessed for those wages. And then it will show that they are being repaid exactly the same amount, so that paycheck shows zero. And it might have some message like, thank you for accepting this zero paycheck and assisting to stabilize the IHSS program funding. Now, in the state controller's office, where they cut the checks to the IHSS workers, in that moment of a transaction between the deduction and the worker being repaid, they seized additional federal money, $190 million. The federal government matches the revenues that are generated from the application of the sales tax. So that's what we're doing, and it's a provider fee, and we use that term consciously because there's a lot of political tension associated with the T word, the tax word, and much greater comfort with the word fee. So you sometimes will hear it called either thing, a provider tax or a provider fee, but it's a mechanism to draw down additional federal money, and it's completely lawful.
Karen, as Herb Meyer asked this question, with the election coming up of a new governor, do you anticipate, maybe give us a synopsis, if you think there'll be a difference between either Brown or Meg as far as being governor, and how this might affect IHSS?
Well, first I want to say, Herb, you are a fearless advocate, and we've appreciated very much all the stuff that you have done in the Capitol with legislators and with the press. And it's great to not see you, but hear you over the phone. I'll answer that question, and it's a perfect segue into the next number of policy issues I want to discuss. And I'm not going to offer an opinion. I'm going to tell you what the facts are. Meg Whitman has made many speeches, and they are on YouTube, and you can watch them. This is just a fact that she is mirroring Governor Schwarzenegger in saying that she believes that the IHSS program is riddled with fraud. She has made speeches where she says that her proposal will be to cut the IHSS program by 25% for $1 billion savings, because she believes that there is $1 billion worth of fraud in the IHSS program. So that absolutely says that what we've gone through with Schwarzenegger, we will go through with Meg Whitman if she is elected as the governor. Jerry Brown, he has also made speeches, and he has not attacked the program at all for alleged fraud. His speeches, also on YouTube, are very much supportive of consumers and providers and the rights under Olmstead to receive care in the least restrictive setting. So those are just the facts of what the candidates have said. In terms of what we see ahead for budget fights, the budget, when the legislature comes back, they will deal with, I'm sure, fallout from this budget. The press has accurately called it budget that was a get-out-of-town budget or kicking the can down the road. The budget that was just signed by the governor is going to fall apart pretty quickly. There were a lot of assumptions that were rosy, to use the kindest term. The projections, so not only does this budget, does the budget that we are just now working under, well, does that fall apart, but the projections for the 11-12 year are that we are facing another $12 billion deficit on top of whatever the problems will be that when this budget falls apart. So the candidates have put forward their thinking about how to deal with the ongoing deficit, and I won't go further into what their proposals are. Now, going back into the whole issues of fraud, this governor worked very hard to try to expand the list of crimes that are used to disqualify ICE providers, and he tried on his own to say that if a provider had a felony offense ever in their whole life, or if they were guilty of and had been convicted of a specified list of misdemeanors, that they could not ever be paid as an ICE provider. The courts kept the governor from implementing that all felonies policy. The governor then put a lot of pressure on the legislature to change the law and expand the list of disqualifying crimes. There was, I think, a very smart compromise that was worked out by the leadership and the Big Five, and that has been adopted. So there's two different tiers of disqualifying crimes. The first one is the current list of the 3 crimes that are used to prevent workers from getting paid, and that's felony, elder abuse, child abuse, or fraud against government-funded programs. And there's no exceptions, and expungements are not honored. Expungements are where you go to court and you're able to show that you've been rehabilitated, and people think that that takes the crime off their record, but it really doesn't. But it does show on the criminal record as an expungement, and in most cases, employers are supposed to treat expungements as though the felony conviction did not occur. So these 3 crimes in Tier 1, these are the crimes that the federal government requires be used for the Medicaid program, and in our state, the Medi-Cal program. And providers who have convictions within the last 10 years for those 3 crimes cannot be paid. That all stays the same, including the current appeals process. What they've put on top of that is what I call Tier 2, and they're using a list of serious and violent felonies that were defined by voters in Proposition 36 a few years ago, and those serious and violent felonies include things like murder and rape and felony convictions where a person who has been convicted has to then register as a sex offender. Those are the types of crimes that they have enacted. There are absolutely no misdemeanors on the list. Expungements and dismissals will be honored, and meaning that those, when there's an expungement or a dismissal, that's not grounds for termination. So we'll have this new list that goes into effect after 90 days after the governor signed the bill, and again, that will be sometime around the middle of January. And new providers, not the current group that we have right now that we've cleared, but new providers will have to be tested up against this expanded list of crimes. They'll go through a criminal background check just like they do right now, but in addition to the 3 crimes that we've been using to disqualify providers, anybody with a felony conviction in the last 10 years for this new list of crimes also will be terminated. Now, going back to what I said about the Speaker and the President pro tem holding up consumer rights as an important principle in their negotiations, they put into the statute that if a consumer wants to keep a provider who has one of these serious and violent felonies, that consumer has the absolute right to do that. The consumers will receive a notice that says your provider has a felony conviction for, and it will name the specific penal code section and describe the crime within this list of the serious and violent felonies list. the consumer will get that information, and then they will have the right to say, you know, in effect, I don't care. I still want this person to be my provider, and there is no authority at all for the county or for the state to override the consumer's choice. The ability for a consumer to reinstate a provider only applies on a one-on-one basis. So let's just say that I, Karen Kiesler, had a felony murder conviction on my record, and Herb, you were my consumer. You could sign a form that said, Karen is still gonna be my provider. But that would not transfer to another consumer. And I would not go to work for another ICE consumer without them also signing that form. So that's a very important reinstatement that providers have through consumer approval. Providers also would be able to appeal through a general exception process, which is that they could file for an appeal to the state and be reinstated upon showing evidence of rehabilitation. And the law says that each appeal has to be considered on its own merits, and if a provider does not get reinstated by the state appeals unit, then they can appeal on to an administrative law judge. I want to emphasize again that this is a prospective provision of the bill. So we have about 400,000 ICE providers in the state of California right now. Most of them, we're down to about less than 40,000, who still have to complete their provider enrollment procedure by the end of the year. For everybody who has finished the provider enrollment procedures by the end of the year and been cleared with the 3 disqualifying crimes, they're good to go. It's new providers that for next year will have to clear for the expanded list of crimes.
Karen, this is Cindy. I hate to stop you. Everybody really wants to hear what you have to say. And I thank you so much. We're kind of nearing the end, but I want to give Lauren Steinberg a chance to talk. Lauren, as I mentioned, uses her IHS hours for work, which is really unique. Karen, thank you so much. And if you want to hear Karen, she very graciously comes on our SECA regular calls, which happens the 3rd Wednesday of every month at 10 o'clock. Contact us if you don't know how to get on the phone, and you can get an update from Karen. So thank you so much. And
happy to do it.
Thank you. And Lauren, take it away.
All right, thank you. So my name is Lauren Steinberg. Like Cindy was saying, I work at the Berkeley Center for Independent Living. I do systems change advocacy and have worked very heavily. Sorry, is that better? I work at the Berkeley Center for Independent Living. I'm their systems change advocate. And I've worked very heavily in the area of IHSS as we've gone through the budget negotiations, trying to maintain services. I also use my hours at work in order to, be able to attend meetings like this and just for, assistance at the office. But I wanted to talk briefly about the effect that the background checks are having from the consumer perspective of hiring providers. I don't know if you're all aware of how it works on a practical level, but essentially providers are being expected to pay out of pocket $52 to be background checked, to get authorized to be paid. After putting out that $52, they have to then wait up to a month for the results to come in. After the results come in, and assuming they pass the check, they have to wait another 1 to 2 months for their first paycheck to be processed, which I'm sure, as you can imagine, is a huge roadblock to finding and hiring adequate assistance. And while I understand that the government believes we need to background check providers and all of that, it is creating a huge roadblock for many of the consumers that I see. Even many of the attendants that contact our consumers at CIL and myself, who are interested in working but just can't. They honestly cannot afford to work for IHSS. They cannot afford to put out the money and then wait on top of that to be paid for the work that they're doing.